Hi guys, I hope that you're having a great week so far. Today's video is all about tipping your wedding vendors and wedding day gratuities. I've been debating doing this video for actually quite a while. As a wedding vendor myself, I didn't know if it was appropriate for me to give my opinions on this topic. I never want to feel like I'm trying to sway my clients one way or the other or use this video for selfish reasons. However, in the end, because I would say about 80% of my clients generally ask for my suggestions and advice on this topic anyway, most of you out there are probably looking for advice as well about what to do for wedding day tips and things like that. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to just go ahead and do this video and just put a disclaimer out there. This information is going to be a combination of what I'm seeing as standard practices and what also I consider are standard practices just based on guidelines that are out there as far as tipping your wedding day vendors. So I hope that you find this useful. There are 3 points that I did want to make before I get into the actual tipping information. The first point I want to make is to always budget for vendor gratuities from the very beginning. It's difficult to kind of scramble and find, $300, $400, $500 extra at the end of your wedding planning for vendor gratuities, because sometimes it can add up to that depending on how many vendors include their gratuities in their final payments and how many don't. So definitely budget from the very beginning. Obviously, as it gets closer to your wedding and you figure out, which vendor deserves a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on how they have been to work with, you can adjust accordingly. But just as a general rule of thumb, put how much you think you'll need to tip that vendor based on this information and any information out there you find. And then you'll be all set in the week of the wedding when you're sorting out all of this stuff for your wedding day. The second tip I wanted to make is also just keep in mind that tipping is very discretionary, and I want you to know that I also know that. And you should also keep that in mind as you're watching this video. When it comes down to it, a tip is often swayed one way or the other depending on how happy you are with that vendor. Did they go above and beyond? Did they really try hard to go out of their way to make you happy? Did they only just meet your expectations? Did they not meet your expectations? Those are definitely things to take into consideration when you are tipping a wedding day vendor. I just wanted to stress that I'm very aware of that, and I think that you should also be very aware of that as well. The third thing I wanted to make, and this is just kind of a general tip as far as gratuities on your wedding day, I always recommend that my clients go to bank tellers when they're withdrawing funds to provide gratuities for their wedding day vendors. Just because that way you don't have to withdraw all 20s from an ATM, which can get kind of cumbersome on the wedding day if you have a big wad of 20s that you're carrying around. Usually if you go to a bank teller, you can kind of determine, okay, well, I need 2 $100 bills, I need 4 $50 bills, and I need this many $20 bills. Just makes it easier on the person that's handing out the gratuities as well as you. That way you're not carrying around big stacks of $20 bills. So that's really not super important in the grand scheme of things. It's just a tip that I like to tell people that makes it a little bit easier on everyone. So with all that information said, let's go ahead and get started. The first one I want to talk about is actually probably the most complicated and the one vendor that I get most frequently asked about when it comes to tipping. And it's your catering company or whatever company is providing your food, whether it's your venue or your caterer. These days, there's typically what is called a service charge in your contract. It can be anywhere from 18 to 20%, which is very standard, a little bit less or maybe a little bit more depending on where you live. If this service charge is included in your contract, you do not need to worry about additional gratuities on your wedding day because that is considered your gratuity. I have confirmed this with several vendors as well as our own wedding. Vendor gratuities were included in our contract under the name service charge, so you really don't need to worry about additional tipping on top of that. However, if you've been really happy with your catering and or banquet manager, they've gone above and beyond for you, they've really gone out of their way to make you happy and provide you a top-notch service, it isn't completely out of the ordinary to tip them an additional amount on top of the service charge. Typically $50 to $100 for that banquet manager is appropriate in that case. Now where it gets tricky is if a service charge is not already included in your contract, and that might be something that you'll have to consider paying out in cash on the night of. One way to get around that is to ask your caterer and or venue if they can include the gratuity in the final payment. That way you can pay your final bill with your credit card and send off that last final check knowing that your gratuities have already been taken care of. Sometimes people will do that and sometimes they won't. If they do, that is definitely the recommendation that I would make for you. If they don't, this is where it gets a little bit on the tricky side. If for some reason you're not able to calculate your final gratuities into your final payment on your bill, you're going to have to pay it all out in cash on the day of the wedding. I found the easiest way to calculate gratuities for your catering staff if it's not already included in your final bill is to just determine 18 to 20% of the entire cost of your food and beverage service, and then just put that amount of cash into an envelope and have your catering and or banquet manager distribute it appropriately to the staff members. And that catering and banquet manager is actually going to be expecting to break down the cash for you anyway, so don't worry. It's something that they're going to expect to have to do on the wedding night, so you're not burdening them with an extra responsibility. The next tricky vendor is probably likely going to be bartending. If for some reason bartending is not included in your catering contract, for example, perhaps you have to hire an outside company, or the bartending gratuity is not included in your contract, which if you have a service charge in your contract, it will be covered. It's best to just go ahead and ask the company directly how typically bartending gratuities are handled, because honestly, I cannot find one straight answer for this. It has varied so greatly with all of my own clients, and the information online pretty much follows the same practice. It's just different all around the board. So what I would do is definitely go ahead and contact the people that are in charge of the bartending staff members, whether it's your catering person or it's the head of the bartending company that's providing the services for you on the wedding day. A lot of the weddings that I do will actually have tip jars on the actual bar, which means that the guests will be responsible for providing the tips for the bartenders on the wedding day. Some clients don't want this because they want to be completely gracious hosts and they don't want their guests to have to be responsible for providing gratuities for their bartenders on the wedding day, and that's when they'll either pay out in cash at the end of the night or they'll include it in the bartending bill. The only blanket statement that I can make for bartending is that 10 to 15% of the total bar bill seems to be appropriate. So I hope that helps you guys, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be super specific on that one, but when it comes down to it, if you're unsure, just go ahead and ask whoever's in charge and they will direct you to the appropriate amount to tip for your bartenders. Okay guys, for hair and makeup people, it's very, very simple. 20% for your trials before the wedding day for hair and makeup, 20% on your actual wedding day for hair and makeup as well. Very simple and very standard. If for some reason there are some last minute changes on the actual morning of the wedding, for example, maybe a bridesmaid suddenly decided that she wanted to get her hair and or makeup done, maybe you'll want to consider throwing in like 25 or 30% as a gratuity instead if the person did handle it very, very well. That isn't uncommon. I've seen some changes last minute and then they'll just tip, you know, accordingly, and that is also always very appreciated. When it comes to musicians for weddings, gratuities are often expected. Musicians can include anyone from ceremony music like violinist or a cellist or harpist or anyone like that to a church organist, and then also into the reception as far as a band or a DJ. Musicians that are only partaking in part of the day, for example, maybe they're only for ceremony and or cocktail hour, they typically get $20 a person. If you've been extremely happy with their services, $25 or $30 is more than appropriate. For DJs, $50 to $150 as a cash gratuity is pretty appropriate and fairly standard. I know that's a really big vague range to give to you, but it really depends on how happy you've been with their service. I would say the average amount is $100 for DJ gratuity. As far as band leader, if you've been working with a band leader and they've been really great to work with and you're just happy with their service, $50 to $100 going his way is often appropriate and appreciated, and then each band member is about $15 to $20 or so. Again, if you're happy with their service, $25 to $30 would also be appropriate for each band member. One vendor I get asked a lot about are officiants. If your officiant is a member of a clergy, they don't accept cash tips normally. What they'll do is they'll just accept a donation to their church, and it depends on if you're a member of the church or not and if they've accepted a fee to have your ceremony take place there. If they've charged you a fee, you can lessen your gratuity amount to about $50 to $150. If they have not charged you a fee, I would tip a little bit more than that, maybe $100 to $150, depending on how comfortable you are and how much you've enjoyed working with that particular church, and just basically what you feel is appropriate. As far as judges, they charge a flat rate for their service, and I often feel like they charge a pretty hefty price tag to perform your ceremony, and I don't ever usually hand out gratuities for judges, nor do they typically expect one. Some states I've read it's also illegal for judges to accept cash gratuities for performing ceremonies, so that's definitely not needed, nor is it expected. One question I do also get asked as far as officiants is, should I invite them to our reception? Is that typically the standard practice, or do I not need to? What should I do? Typically, judges are not often extended an invitation to the reception unless you know them well on a personal level, or you've kind of become closer through the wedding planning process. Typically, if you want there to be a blessing at your reception and you want the person that performed your marriage ceremony to be present at your reception to perform that blessing, they will often get invited to the reception, and you will have to pay for their meal, and generally their spouse is also invited. Typically they won't stay much longer past dinner unless they are very close to you, but that's just something that I feel like you really have to make a personal gut decision on. If you feel like it's right for you, go ahead and do it, but you shouldn't feel bad if it's a decision that you feel isn't appropriate for you, and whatever you're comfortable with should be the right decision for you. For transportation such as limos or horse and carriages, typically gratuities are already included in your contract. However, if they're not, $20 per driver is very, very appropriate. If you feel like the company has been really great to work with, again, as I keep saying, I feel like a broken record, $25 or $30 in cash is often appreciated. For coat check and valet attendants or any other attendants that you may have at your wedding, and this is typically for more upscale, lavish celebrations, $1 to $2 per guest is very, very standard, and going up more than that is not something that I would really typically see. And I did some research online with this as well, because I don't often coordinate weddings that have these types of services available to their guests. But I did find that anything over $3 per guest for gratuities for attendants like bathroom attendants, coat check, or valet, $1 to $2 per guest is perfectly appropriate in this situation. There are a few vendors on your wedding day that don't necessarily expect gratuities, nor do I ever really hand them envelopes for gratuities on the wedding day. In fact, I've never handed an envelope to these particular people, and they are your cake baker, your florist, and your rental company delivery. And this is because they usually charge you a pretty decent fee to deliver those items to your reception as it is, and so gratuity is not necessarily expected. I did find on some larger websites some articles about vendor gratuities that delivery people that included your cake baker, your florist, and your rental company, it was generally expected to give them $5 to $10 per person for delivery. However, I have never personally experienced that. So what I might do is also ask former brides in your general area. Maybe it's a territory thing. In Chicago, I've never experienced that. I know that down south, some customs are a little bit different as far as tipping. So I would just see what other brides have done in the past and kind of feel out the situation. Generally, I don't think it's necessary, and please, anyone out there can correct me if I'm wrong. I would like to hear anyone else's opinions on this, but generally speaking, I don't find this to be necessary. Of course, go with your gut opinion on this, and if you do feel like it's appropriate, go ahead and budget for that from the beginning and create envelopes for delivery people as well. Now, as far as photography and videography, it's generally accepted that people who own their own company don't expect a gratuity, and I do find that to be true. However, I would say that about half of my clients these days are tipping those vendors even if they do own their own company. I think it's just more of a showing gratitude thing and just saying, you know, we really appreciate you working for us, and here's just a few extra bucks coming your way for working so hard. And it is generally when the clients are over the moon happy with their service. Sometimes these vendors will also get very lovely gifts as a thank you, or just a very nice heartfelt thank you card. And those are often, you know, just very much appreciated. And I do want to preface this by saying once again that these are not expected from these vendors. Of course, it's always appreciated if you are happy with their service, and if that vendor really has truly gone above and beyond, a cash gratuity is not uncommon. So that's something that you'll kind of have to take into consideration as well when you are preparing your tip envelopes for the wedding day. Just kind of figure out, you know, how happy have you been with your videographer or your photographer? Have they really gone above and beyond for you? And just do what you're comfortable with. So like I said, about half of my clients do provide cash tips and or a card or like a gift or something along those lines. Usually it is cash though. Half of the clients don't provide anything. So that's, like I said, it's really up to you and what you're comfortable with. If you do hire a company and an employee of that company, for example, like a photography company, photographs your wedding, and they do not own that company, it is customary to tip that person about $100 in cash or so. I'd say $75 to $100, and that also includes videography. Sometimes clients will go upwards of $100 to perhaps $150, but I would say $100 in cash is pretty average and very, very appropriate. One vendor that I'm actually not going to comment on at all is your wedding planner and or your wedding day coordinator. I don't feel it's appropriate for me to comment on that just because of, the fact that I do this for a living. If you are not a client of mine and you really are just dying to know what standard practice is for tipping a wedding coordinator or planner, feel free to go ahead and email me or YouTube inbox me, and I'll be happy to divulge that information and just kind of give you some guidance and or suggestions on this. But I'm not going to publicly express my opinions on this or even my thoughts or what I see as standard practice just because of what I do. I don't want anyone, like I said before, to think that I'm trying to sway my clients one way or the other. I'm not going to comment on that at all, so I hope that you guys understand why. Okay, so now we are coming to the conclusion of this video. Now that you have all of these envelopes prepared, who hands them out? Your wedding day coordinator and or your wedding day planner will be happy to hand these out, and this is something that they'll expect to do for you. Place all of your gratuities in sealed label envelopes, and then usually what I'll do, for example, when I touch base with you in the morning, I will gather all the supplies that you need me to distribute during the wedding day, and I'll take them from you first thing in the morning so that you don't have to think about it for the rest of the day. And gratuities are usually included in that, so usually I'll just take them from you first thing in the morning, and then your wedding coordinator or your wedding planner will hand those out for you during your reception. If you don't have a planner or a coordinator, think about someone who's reliable in your wedding party, or maybe like a friend or a relative or someone like that who's just really reliable and would be happy to do this for you. Maybe your best man, maybe your maid of honor, maybe the father of the bride, maybe the mother of the groom. Anyone that you think is appropriate to hand out those gratuities is the person that you should be comfortable handing off those envelopes to. That's just one last tip for you. I am at the end of this video now. Yay! I hope that you guys found this useful. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to comment below, message me, send me an email. Sam@GetHitchedWeddings.com is my email address. I'm always happy to answer questions, especially if you're maybe confused on a particular vendor that I didn't mention and you just want a little bit more guidance on it. But yeah, that's it. Like I said in the beginning, I hope that you guys are having a great week so far. It is almost the weekend, and we have a great wedding on Sunday that we're super excited about. We're going to have a great weekend. I hope you do too, and I'll see you back here soon. Bye!